If you've listened to any of my previous podcasts, you'll know quite a bit about me and my younger life. Writing and directing my first play at 11, becoming the youngest TV director at just 17, a short stint in a boy band, and becoming a freelance writer. But what I haven't talked about is my acting and writing career in later life. I haven't talked about my published books, my TV and radio appearances, or writing and directing stage shows. This is Refracted World. I'm doing something different today, something I've never done before in my podcast history, of which there are now 26 plus episodes. I'm doing a part one, and that's because the story I'm about to tell you is the entire journey of my play Blink, and it's a long one. And so when I recorded it, I recorded this about a month ago, but when I recorded it, it was an hour long. And so I've decided to split it up into parts 1 and part 2 so it's more digestible. And also, these will be the last 2 episodes of season 1 because I'm taking a break. Only a few weeks. Don't freak out, everyone. I'm only taking a few weeks break because I'm hopefully bringing back the podcast in season 2 with something bigger and better, if I can manage to pull it off. And I don't want to go into too much detail in case I don't. It might just be that the podcast comes back as it is, and that will be fine. But I promise the podcast is coming back, and you will still be able to listen to it, but you might also be able to watch it. And that's all I'm saying. Anyway, let's continue with the story of Blink. After Jason's death in 2012, my life went rapidly downhill, with me at absolute rock bottom in October 2014. In an attempt to engage my creativity and give my life meaning, I released a daily sci-fi series called Apocalypse on YouTube. I had no money back then. I made it all myself, and I had the help of a makeup artist, a friend of mine, another friend who did the graphics, and put it all together and then released it. A short episode was released every day in September 2014, so for 30 episodes. I actually received quite a bit of press from it, with a former Doctor Who writer commenting on Twitter saying how much it reminded him of the good old days working on Doctor Who. Alas, with no money at all, I wasn't able to do any extensive marketing, and the show fizzled out into pretty much nothing. In time, it actually became my most watched video ever, gathering around 55,000 views. But back then, I felt it was a bust. This endeavour was almost my last, but thankfully I was able to pick myself back up, and the following year I met Ken. He helped turn my life around and gave me back the confidence I had lost. In December 2016, I announced to Ken and my best friend Mike that I was going to write a musical. I had never written a musical, and my only experience writing a play was when I was still in middle school. Even so, this was something I really felt I could achieve, and so started writing the pages. I was fortunate enough to receive funding from the Arts Council, and so I cast, directed, and produced the show. Set in London, the story focused on Jake, a man soon out of university and stepping onto the gay scene for the very first time. It was funny, entertaining, but with serious notes thrown in there to hopefully educate the audiences on different aspects of modern gay life. Blink of an Eye was a success, but it wasn't without its problems. Some of them major. Cast issues, employing people who tried to destroy my work, missing set pieces, and working flat out for 16 hours a day for 6 months whilst paying myself absolutely nothing, meant this production mentally broke me. The following year, Ken and I married, and the day was like a stage production, bringing together Singaporean and English customs to our wedding along with music, games, and video media. It was the best day of our lives, but took months of planning. After the wedding and a well-deserved honeymoon in Thailand, I turned back to a book I had started writing before Jason's death and hadn't touched since. This was something I could do without the interference or damage of anyone else. But my experience from Blink of an Eye scarred me. I didn't know who I could trust, and ended up trusting very few people. Thankfully, a friend of mine used to be a book editor and offered to edit my book once it was completed. I'd written too much. She managed to take out 20,000 words as well as edit it all together. I still have a long book. It's 100,000 words today, but those missing 20,000 words were needed. I did a lot of research into book publishing, but I was also frightened. What if I sent it to agents and publishers and they stole my idea? The main plot point of Refraction had never been done before, and even if my work wasn't plagiarized, the idea very much could be. And so, after lots of research, I decided to self-publish. There had been quite a few success stories at that point, but I knew I needed to do it right. So I hired a PR company, and an illustrator, and a separate designer for the cover. In late 2019, my first published novel, Refraction, was finally available to the world. And the reviews were all good. I had several book tours booked in for 2020, and there I knew I would be able to not only sell my book, but also sell myself and hopefully meet new people and maybe get onto the ladder, which is what I needed to. Everything was looking perfect. Everyone who had so far read the book was giving it 4 or 5 stars. And with this book tour planned and everything just looked like this was going to move forward. But we all know what happened in 2020. And with COVID, it didn't just destroy my book plans, it also destroyed my creativity because my brain switched over to survival mode. I created nothing in 2020. I came off social media and I was trapped in our tiny flat in an almost vegetative state. I had nothing to give the world. In the following year, with the lockdowns over, my creativity returned, and I wrote and published my second book, The Cracked Reflection. It's a prequel story to Refraction, and I hoped it would boost sales. It did, but nowhere near the numbers I'd hoped for. I returned to social media, and I was able to market both my books, but as I discovered pretty quickly, self-publishing was not the right choice for me. It is simply so easy to do, anyone can do it. Some authors are brilliant, and they do hire editors and designers and have marketing budgets set aside, just like I did. But the majority don't. And with no quality checks in place at any level, the entire market is flooded with whatever the writer puts out, making it very difficult for the people who buy books to be willing to take a chance and purchase yours. And now with the advent of AI, the market is now flooded with even worse books. And so I totally understand that. It's difficult to buy someone's self-published work because if they haven't gone through the quality checks, then what are you buying? Self-publishing needs quality checks. And when I've raised this with different people online, they have cut me down for saying it. But they do. If you are selling a product, it should meet a certain standard, like every other product for sale. And it doesn't mean hindering your work in any way, it just means that an editor will have to be involved before the book is published, or something like that. Because I have read so many self-published books that are badly written, badly spell-checked, and badly formatted, and we shouldn't be paying for substandard things like that. So, with my wind completely out of my sails, at the beginning of January 2022, I was feeling extremely lost. I would wake up every morning in a state of panic. Some mornings, I even woke up crying. I'd rush into the living room and hug Ken, and I just couldn't stop sobbing. I'd spent almost 2 years of my life as an emotional wreck, worrying and surviving and doing very little else. I was 2 years older, and my books that I had put all of my love and effort and work into had not performed anywhere near as well as I felt they should. And due to the fact that 2020 was COVID year, the book tours had all been cancelled, and I didn't have any extra money to promote them anymore. My social media presence had grown since I returned in late 2021, but it was too late by then, and all the amazing people I met online and made friends with, they were great, and I had some great mentors as well as friends. But all of them were writers who were also trying to market their books, and it just became like a whole pond full of writers, and we were never able to attract readers in. And this just made me feel as trapped then as I did during lockdown. I needed to do something big with my life. I needed to get myself out there and rejoin the world. I needed to live again. And so I once again made a huge announcement. I was going to write a play and perform it at the Edinburgh Fringe that year. This was mid-January 2022, and the Fringe Festival was only 7 months away. I didn't have a script. All I had was an idea for an opening scene that I'd written in my phone while sitting on the sofa during lockdown. I had never been to the Edinburgh Fringe, and I hadn't stepped foot on stage or acted in over 15 years. Yet, I felt with all my being that this is what I had to do. But I was also terrified. Could I actually pull this off? I spent the next few weeks in research mode. I learned about the festival, I evaluated the many theatres, and I looked at cost. It was really high, really, really high, but I was adamant this was what I needed to do. By the end of January, I had booked the theatre for a 10-day run. We also booked the accommodation, a small one-bed flat, 45 minutes walk from the centre of Edinburgh, and it cost more than our honeymoon in Thailand, which was a private villa with a private pool in an all-inclusive spa resort on a private beach. But everywhere was ridiculously expensive in Edinburgh during August. At £210 per night, this was one of the cheaper options. Some hotels were charging 10 times that amount. As we needed somewhere we could wash my costume and save money by cooking our meals, this seemed like a better option, even though it wasn't really close to the venue. I also booked a theatre in London for 2 dates after Edinburgh. Living in the same city meant costs were much lower. Alongside the theatres were other costs like travel, marketing, advertising, food, props, costumes. In total, we spent almost £6,000 on Blink in August 2022. We knew that even if I sold out every single performance, we would not make our money back. But this wasn't about money. It was about getting my work and my face out there in the hopes it would open up more opportunities in the future. It was a huge gamble, especially as just 1 week after booking the theatres, a house we had looked at months prior suddenly accepted our offer. As we hadn't heard from them, we actually believed we'd lost the house. Yet now, we owned our very first house 90 minutes away from our current flat, and it needed a lot of work. As Ken was working Monday to Friday, that left me doing the majority of it. I had never been good at DIY in my life and was a total novice for what needed doing. But YouTube is an amazing resource, and over the next 6 weeks, I dismantled, plastered, filled, fixed and painted. Ken helped me on the weekends, and together we finished most of the work the day before moving in. Those few remaining jobs are still waiting to be completed 2 years later. We moved in at the beginning of April 2022, and after unpacking and settling, I was finally able to sit down and start writing my script. It was almost the end of April. I was now just 3 months away until show day. Trying to save money as much as we could, I designed the poster and flyers myself, which was my first mistake. My second was not hiring a director. With all of my experience directing TV and the musical, I reasoned this was a cost we just didn't need. But directing yourself is near impossible, as you can't see yourself all the mistakes you're making. I did, however, have a few people read the script before it was finalised. But all of these people were either authors, friends, or family. I didn't know any playwrights to ask back then. I rehearsed in my living room, I performed for Ken and our next door neighbour Eileen, and by the time we got on the train, I knew every single word by heart. But I still didn't have the confidence I knew I would need to stand on the stage and perform it. It's a weird feeling, pushing yourself to do something you're unsure you can actually do. Yes, I had performed hundreds of times in the past, but that was back then, when I didn't worry so much. Now I worried about everything. On top of that, the amount of money this was costing and me worrying about my time living on this planet running out, I was putting myself under immense pressure. This is your last chance to succeed, I would tell myself. If this doesn't work, you're a failure. I carried those words around with me always, keeping me up at night and with me every single day. This was not helping my flagging confidence, but I knew that I had to do this. I just couldn't stop thinking about all the bad stuff. Thankfully, I was confident of my script. The story I was telling was from the heart and held a message which I really believed in, and still do. I also had Ken with me, my absolute rock. Without him, I would never have gotten to this point in my life, and having him by my side gave me the strength I really needed to keep going. Of course, when I stepped foot on the stage, I would be alone. In all of my performances before, even playing the lead, I was supported by a cast. Now, due to so many people letting me down in the past, and losing faith in anyone else coming anywhere near my work, it was just me and my waning confidence. Another cost-saving exercise was having Ken be my tech guy. I chose to have no music and no lighting changes for this very reason, which meant that it was just me talking on a stage for an hour. So all Ken had to do was fade in the lights at the beginning and then fade them out at the end of the show. That actually saved us quite a bit of money, but it also meant that Ken couldn't be on the front row, which I really wanted him to be. It would have been really comforting to be able to see his face. The day we arrived in Edinburgh was the day of my tech rehearsal, and that actually went really well, but I did rush through my script. The 55-minute monologue ended up being just 48 minutes long. I naturally talk fast anyway, but when I'm nervous, I talk even faster, and that isn't good when you're performing on stage. Not only does the audience need to hear everything you're saying, I'm also acting, and those pauses and intonations are essential at explaining the story, the way it was written. The problem was, I was bloody terrified. I was one day away from performing my own play on my own at the largest and most prestigious arts festival in the world. What was I doing? The night before my performance was the meet and greet. Just me and Ken and handfuls of flyers in a sea of people we didn't know. After 2 years of hiding away from the world, wearing masks and sanitizing everything our hands touched, this was the first time we had been around so many people. I hadn't forgotten how to socialize, but I was certainly rusty. Thinking back, it was probably the same for most people there. But eventually we started mingling and getting to know one another. We talked about our shows, and I made a timetable of all the shows we could see while we were there. Amazingly, I slept that night. I think exhaustion had finally taken over. The next morning, we got up, had breakfast, and I paced. A lot. Being August, it was very warm, even in Scotland, so I was very sweaty. As this was a fringe festival, we only had 10 minutes before each show to get in, set up, and then start performing, which in a way is good. You don't have time to think. It's literally waiting for the previous show to finish, quickly get in, and then you're on. As there wasn't a backstage area, I started the show sitting on a seat in the middle of the stage and waited as the audience walked in. I was looking at a prop phone, which in my head made sense as the play revealed the story, but in fact most people just thought I was checking social media. It wasn't even a real phone. A director would have struck that first rehearsal. I was a bag of nerves as I was looking down at this plastic fake phone in my hand, and I could hear the audience muttering and entering. We didn't have any friends in Edinburgh, and so all of these people were strangers, and all of them had come to see me just from my posters and flyers and many social media posts. The lighting change was my cue. I looked up to the audience, but thankfully I couldn't see anyone beyond the lights in front of my eyes. This was good. I didn't want to be worrying about audience numbers. I just could perform the show I knew back to front. Of course, nerves can make you forget things from time to time, and I did miss some things out, but never noticeably, or to the detriment of the story. I was, however, still speaking far too fast. I knew I was, as at the end of the first scene, I was forcibly trying to slow myself down, and I was out of breath. But the audience were great. They laughed, they cheered, and they cried. They actually cried. When I wrote Blink, I wanted it to be an emotional journey, but I honestly didn't know how that would translate to an audience. And they cried. Getting an audience to laugh is one thing, but for my words to elicit such a powerful response was honestly mind-blowing. As I left the theatre, there was a queue of people outside waiting to see me. They hugged me, they shared my own stories, and all of them said how much my play had resonated with them. The numbers were relatively low to begin with, but as word of mouth spread, the audience numbers grew, and for each and every performance. That is, all except for one, a Thursday show halfway through my run. I'd had a lot of reviewers see my show at that point. Blink had been awarded every single star imaginable, from quite a large collection of 5 and 4 stars, some 3, 1 2, and even a 1 star, which I obviously was not pleased about, especially as the review stated things about my play that were not even in it. I did wonder if the review had even been there at all. But on this particular day, my final reviewer was coming to see Blink, and he and his partner sat on the front row. Other than them, there were only 3 other people in the audience, and one of those worked for the theatre. To me, it didn't really matter if there was 1 or 50 people in there. I always give my best performance. And it showed, as the reviewer stayed behind and offered to take Ken and I out for a drink. Of tea. It was still only 4 in the afternoon, and I always waited until after the show to eat my lunch. I didn't want any accidents escaping while I was on stage. The reviewer's name was Paul T. Davies, and along with his partner Neville, he had reviewed the Edinburgh Fringe for many years. Paul was also a writer, performer, and director, and praised both me and my show. We chatted for a long time and discussed all the trials it had taken for me to get to this point. We both agreed there was room for improvement in the play. After a week of shows and a very mixed bag of reviews from critics and audience members, I could see where the play needed work. Ken and I also saw over 30 other shows while we were at the Fringe, and could see the level of detail in those shows that Blink just didn't have. For financial reasons, there was no lighting, no music or director, but the play really did need those things, and a professional eye to look over the script, and to get professional flyers and marketing materials made. Paul very kindly offered his services, for free. He could see the potential of Blink and wanted to help the show the following year. This was exactly what I had been waiting for, someone to see Blink's potential and help hone it in with me. That meeting was to change the play for the better and gave me focus and confidence. Both are something I desperately needed. The last few performances in Edinburgh were the best of the Fringe. I was on a high, and with almost a full house, I felt alive. The show really touched people, and I felt more comfortable in my role and performing in front of a live audience. It was sad to leave Edinburgh, but after 12 days, performing and networking every single day and night, we were both burnt out. We returned to London, and the following day, both fell ill with flu. It wasn't COVID, we tested all the time, and then for a week, in the hot and humid August heat, we laid on the sofa, coughing and spluttering our way through Disney Plus's offerings. Thankfully, I was fully recovered for my 2 London dates at the end of August. These were as important, if not more so, than Edinburgh. This time, I would be performing in front of my friends, and the show would be professionally filmed. But after a successful run in Edinburgh, I had much more confidence. What I hadn't realised was how much harder it is to entertain a London crowd compared to Edinburgh, and how considerate or inconsiderate my friends would be when watching the show. They didn't laugh. There was very little audience interaction on my first London performance, and I couldn't understand why. I knew the play was funny. I had made strangers in Edinburgh laugh every single show. So this was really daunting for me. I was stood on that cold stage in blackout, apart from the lights shining in my eyes, and I could hear nothing. Afterwards, I was told that they didn't want to interrupt me, as they wanted to hear every word I was saying. Unfortunately, there was a reviewer in the audience, and the lack of response was the reason he gave me 2 stars. The show had evolved from my time in Edinburgh, and although I couldn't do a full rewrite, I had multiple changes, sometimes on the fly, to improve it. The London run should have been the very best version of Blink, and yet I received a 2-star review? This wasn't what I needed going into my second and final performance the next day. It was once again a full house, and once again, many of them were friends. I managed to tell a few of them not to be afraid to laugh or react to what I was doing on stage if they wanted to, and this seemed to help, but I was shook by the previous night's review and scared of performing once again in an echo chamber. Adding to my nerves was the mic clipped onto my shirt and the camera at the back of the theatre filming everything I and the audience did. All of these factors played a huge part in what was to happen that night. While performing the opening scene, the scene I had written in lockdown, the one I knew better than any other part of the play, the one I had recited more than 100 times, simply vanished mid-sentence. My brain suddenly wiped of all words, and I had no idea what was coming next. While standing there, in the middle of the stage, with many eyes watching my every move. This had always been my greatest fear, blanking on stage. A million thoughts ran through my brain at light speed, but none of them were my script. A second had passed for the audience, but for me, I was living in a nightmare. I couldn't stop the show and apologise while glancing over the script. I had to keep going. But with what? I very casually looked at Ken, who was in the technician's box, before exclaiming out loud, "What do I do? What do I do?" The audience thought it was part of the show, but I was really asking it of myself. I made something up on the spot and jigged around the stage like an idiot, distracting the onlookers with a bit of pantomime before the script finally reinserted itself back into my consciousness. I had skipped about a page and a half of dialogue, but managed to piece it all together, and the audience were never aware of anything that had happened. Until afterwards in the bar when I told them all. When I watch it back, I was really shocked. There is only a few seconds of me pausing before covering it up, but in my mind, it was an absolute age. The run was over. 2022 was coming to a close, and I had done what I set out to do. I had met so many great people, learned so much about my craft, and myself, along with Paul, we had a plan for the future. And you can find out all about that history in next week's episode. That's right. We've come to the end of part 1. Part 2 will be here at the same time next week. And then we'll take a short break for a few weeks, possibly at the very latest by the end of June. I'll be back with Season 2 of RefractedWorld, which hopefully will be bigger and better than before. In the meantime, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to Refracted World Plus, where there are even more episodes. And if you're looking for merch, I do have an Etsy store with so many t-shirts that I've designed and some really great designs for Pride Month, which is the whole of June. And yeah, so check that out. And if you do want to buy anything from the shop, use podcast20 as the code, as it will give you 20% off everything in store. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you join me again for the continuing part, the concluding part of the story next week. And until then, take care everyone, and goodbye.